Hello, I'm Victoria from Biblio Lifestyle, and you're listening to the Reader's Couch podcast, the show that will help you bridge the gap between living a full and busy life to one where you're reading, learning new things, and having fun. Today on the couch, I'm so excited to welcome author Marielle Lares to talk about her novel, Son of Blood and Ruin. Son of Blood and Ruin is set in an alternate 16th century colonial Mexico, and the story follows a Mestiza woman named Leonora, who possesses the ability to transform into a panther. And we see Leonora as she joins forces with an Indigenous alliance to resist Spanish control. This book has been pitched as a Zorro retelling, and you can expect history, mythology, romance, adventure, action, and lots more. So in this episode, Marielle and I talk about her new book, what you can expect in book 2 of this series. Plus, we also learn about the books she's reading, get book recommendations, and lots more. But before we get into the episode, pretty please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Leave the show a 5-star rating and write me a review if you enjoy listening. So, thanks in advance. And now onto the episode with author Marielle Lares. Hi readers, welcome again to the Reader's Couch. I'm your host, Victoria Wood, and here on the couch with me to talk about her debut novel, Son of Blood and Ruin, is author Marielle Lares. Hi Marielle, welcome to the Reader's Couch.
Hi Victoria, thank you so much for having me.
Yay, of course. I'm really excited to have you here. Can't wait to talk about your book. But before we get into it, I mean, this is your debut. It's out there. Readers can get their hands on a copy. How excited are you? How are you feeling?
I don't even know what I'm feeling right now. I think it hasn't hit yet. Or I guess that there are times in the day where I'm like, okay, this is happening, especially if things start moving and I start seeing posts and events happening. And so it's a little nerve-wracking, but definitely exciting.
Yay, I think that's normal. We have a bit of nerves, but we're also excited. But I absolutely enjoyed Son of Blood and Ruin. But before I kind of get into the details and we talk about it a bit more, tell our listeners what they can expect. Give us your elevator pitch. What can readers expect when they pick up a copy of Son of Blood and Ruin?
Yeah, Son of Blood and Ruin is a historical fantasy. It's set in 16th century New Spain, which is present-day Mexico. And it follows the life of the morally upstanding Lady Leonora, who moonlights essentially as the masked avenger Panther. So one can expect, adventure, swashbuckling action, a little bit of romance, themes of justice, oppression, all that good historical fantasy stuff. Definitely some loose history in there as well.
Yes, so you'll get the history, you'll get the fantasy, you'll get the action, you'll also get a bit of a romance, and I couldn't stop turning the pages of this one. But folks have also been promoting this one as a gender-flipped Zorro. So tell me about your decision to put a woman at the center of this story.
You're right. This is essentially a Zorro retelling. Zorro is one of my favorite characters. I think he was my first introduction to the superhero genre. And so I fell in love with that character from, I think I remember it. I was probably 9 when I watched the Zorro movie with Antonio Banderas and Catherine Zeta-Jones. And that's where my love for superheroes began. And I knew that I wanted to create something inspired from that character. Of course, gender bent, female, and with a little touch of magic as well. So, superpowers and all that.
Yes, we love the superpower element as well. I was very interested in the idea of this woman who moonlights as her alter ego, Pantera, helping Indigenous people, but also resisting Spanish control. So I guess this is where the loose history bit comes in. Tell me about the history itself, what kind of research you were doing, and what were you trying to portray that kind of mirrors real life and real history a bit.
Yeah, so first of all, historical fiction and fantasy are my two favorite loves, genre-wise. Historical fantasy is such a beautiful beast. And of course, history is fascinating. Mexican history, particularly, is incredibly vast. And it's also very complicated because, 500 years after we were conquered by Spain, we're still debating controversies and discussing perceptions as to like how the conquest was portrayed. And so I knew that the kind of story that I wanted to write had to be rooted in real world history to be able to experience that time period that we know so little about, with also a touch of the fantastical elements, of course, drawn from the mythology of Mexico's original inhabitants. So that's the historical aspect to that. But really, I knew that it had to be that specific time period because we know so little about it. And unless you're a historian, you don't really know what happened from like the 1500s to like the 1800s. And so I wanted to really go back and explore those early changes that took place. And we could also get to see the resistance and conflict of the time, especially from a few historical figures in the book.
Right. Absolutely. So let's break down our main character, Lady Leonora. She's the illegitimate daughter of a viceroy in that area, which is Mexico, but it was New Spain, a local woman who's of the Mexican people. So as a child, she ends up being trained in martial arts and sorcery and becomes a shapeshifter, and she shapeshifts into a panther. So tell us about the character Leonora, who she is from her younger years up. What can readers expect with this character?
Leonora is Indigenous on her mother's side, and she's Spanish on her father's side. So what we see in her is a internal conflict, because she feels that separation between her two sides, at least in the beginning of the story. And we see that she isn't displaced physically because she was born in Mexico, and the story takes place in Mexico, but culturally, ethnically, religiously, there is this sense of loss because she lives in the capital and she follows Spanish customs. She speaks Spanish. She does everything, involved with the Spanish people. And so that's where we see that conflict. And that's where Nahua people use the term Nepantla to mean living in this state of in betweenness, like you're not here, you're not there. So Leonora is a very complicated character, and she feels very lost throughout most of the book. She wants to reach out to her Indigenous side, but she also feels that pull from her Spanish side. But she knows what needs to be done, what the correct thing is, and she definitely feels more strongly toward her Indigenous side just because she has these superpowers, and this comes from her Indigenous side. So I think that pull is very strong there, and she keeps going back to wanting to be with her people, who she feels are the Nahua people. But yeah, she was so much fun to write, especially because I related to her so much in terms of, I grew up as a border kid, and so like Leonora, I navigated these two worlds crossing borders. And in the book, Leonora goes back and forth between the capital and the mountains. So every time she goes back and forth, she's kind of going to different worlds almost. And both of them are her worlds. And so I related a lot to that. And I feel we're very much alike in certain aspects.
I love that you said that, because I was actually going to ask you if you felt similarities with you and Leonora, because when, I read the book first, and I tend to always read a book and then read the author's bio. I know it sounds a bit reverse, but that tends to be my habit. And when I saw that you grew up at the border, so you're crossing the border from the United States into Mexico almost on a daily basis.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, then I see Lenora going to the mountains and leaving the city. So it's interesting hearing you say that. So I'm like, okay, yes, it made sense.
Yes, that's completely intentional. And while there isn't a physical border in the book, we do see that, she is essentially traveling to another world. And
Mm-hmm.
even though it's basically the same place, it's just in the mountains, but it's completely different. And like every time I go to Mexico or I go back and forth to the United States, it's absolutely different. It's first of all, it's another language, it's different in every sense. So yes, I really connected to her in that struggle, in that identity struggle almost. Feeling like, well, you're not totally from there, but I'm not totally from here. And so yes, there's a quote in the book that says, I'm too Spanish for the native and I'm too native for the Spanish. And that's how I always feel. I'm too Mexican for the Americans and I'm too American for the Mexicans. That's the daily struggle, being bicultural, bilingual and all that. So yeah, she has a lot of myself and in her.
Yes, and I think it's also something a lot of immigrants, children of immigrants, can relate to as well, even though, it doesn't have to be Mexican and American, but just, anyone really feeling like you inhabit two worlds or even having, two parents from two different cultures, you're never enough of one and not of the other. And it's just, it's so conflicting.
It is. We struggle so much with this. Like we don't really know where we truly belong, but we also want to kind of assimilate all our sides, especially if you have a father who's from somewhere and then a mother who's from somewhere else, but then you're from somewhere else as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of, it's definitely a conflict there.
Oh, yeah, 100%. So essentially, we see Leonora coming of age, figuring herself out, discovering who she is. What does she owe to the people in Mexico and New Spain? What does she owe to the Nahua people? But also, what does she owe to herself, So we do see her dealing with this conflict, coming of age, finding out who she is. And then it doesn't help, right, that she is promised to a person in the book called Prince Philippe of Spain.
Definitely doesn't help.
Does not help. And then also we have an attractive Nahua man, Andres. I hope I'm saying his name right, but yes. So now we have this romantic conflict. So tell us about one, Prince Philippe and Andres.
Prince Felipe is, well, she has no choice there, right? At first, when she returns to the capital, she is promised to the heir of the Spanish throne. This has to happen, and she knows it. She has no choice there. But then things start happening. She meets Andres, who is indigenous, but he is Spanish military. But there's a real conflict with Leonora and Prince Felipe at first because all she's doing really is following orders. And so to your point, this is a coming of age story in the beginning where she's figuring out what she wants, where she wants to go, what she wants to do. She knows that she doesn't want to marry this prince. And so there, of course, there's also that conflict. But then she starts meeting other people who help her kind of figure out where, or not even figure out, but I think just validate her reasons and just make her really sure of where she wants to go and who she wants to fight for. But it's definitely in the beginning more so just everyone is telling her what to do and she has to follow, these orders because she lives in the palace and, her half-brother is the viceroy of New Spain, so she has duty and responsibilities. But she kind of, that kind of falls away when she starts getting more into her character and, just overall deciding who she is.
Yes, absolutely. So again, we get the historical elements, we get the coming of age elements, we have the romance elements, but then we also get the action, fighting, the adventure and all that, because we see her aligning with an indigenous group and essentially fighting back against Spanish control. The Spanish are persecuting magic. They want the native people essentially to dismiss their old ways, their traditions, and their history. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it there, because I really don't want to get into spoiler territory. But needless to say, there is history, there is the mythology, there is a romance, a coming of age, and of course, there is the action, which I absolutely loved. I do want to ask you, though, about the mythology, because it felt good to read about something I had no idea about, because if I'm being honest, I was discovering lots of new things, but you also have a glossary with information that you can find at the beginning of the book, at the end of the book. So tell me about what your research was like. I know this is a work of fiction, and you're creating things as you go along as well.
Yes, absolutely. It was like, to your point, it was just it's a whole other world out there. And when I began researching Son of Blood and Running, I ran into many accounts, very conflicting sources, inconsistent. There's way too many Navajo creation myths. And so even the word Aztec is somewhat of predicament, because technically we're referring to either the Mexica tribe or who speak Nahuatl, who are the Nahua people. So in the early stages of drafting, it was very difficult looking at history through an indigenous lens rather than a Eurocentric one, because that's just what was available. So it was, at some point, I had to make a decision of, even, different words in Nahuatl, they're spelled differently in Spanish and in English. So at some point I had to decide, okay, all these variant spellings, I'm sticking to this one. All these incredibly different Nahua creation myths, I'm going to stick to one. All of the, there's like over 100 gods in the Nahua pantheon of gods. And so who am I going to explore? Little decisions like that made it very helpful, because again, this is incredibly vast. And when you start digging into kind of like the philosophy that these people have, it just is, again, incredibly vast. And I don't think I even began to scratch the surface in this book with all of these different beliefs and terms like Nepantla, which I mentioned. It's very vast, but it's also very beautiful and fascinating.
So yes, it's a very wide history indeed. But we're working with the knowledge that this is a duology. So there's going to be a second book. So Son of Blood and Ruin is book 1. What can you tell me of book 2?
Book 2, I can say that was my favorite book to write of the two. It's already written. It's been done for some time. The one word that comes to mind, like, to describe this book is just more. So if we had action or romance or injustice or whatever you read in book 1, there's going to be more of it in book 2. So that's the key word, just more. But definitely expect some of the older characters as well as new characters. I'm also incorporating a character list for if people find that helpful. And just, of course, more history, different tribes as well. And, I hope it's a fun book with book number 1 and book number 2. I think there's a lot of humor injected into it as well. There's serious stuff, of course. But at the end of the day, I just hope that readers will find it very fun and enjoyable. And because, again, with the Zorro retelling, Zorro is a very fun character. So I hope that's one of the takeaways from readers reading the book.
Yes, we love fun. And you're right. So Zorro is fun. The one question I have, because I am going to try and pry and get more info, is will we learn more about Leonora and how should I say this? Not her backstory, because we kind of got that in book one, but more of Leonora's conquest, I guess, because that was one thing I loved with Zorro. We saw lots of Zorro's conquest, which granted, Zorro was such a long series.
Yes.
There was so much going on, and you have 2 books, so I know it's 2 different ball fields, but yeah, I would love to hear more about, you know, when Leonora switches to Panthera and, you know, just all the things that she's up to otherwise from her main objective, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Pantera, you know, of course, people began calling her that. She wears the mask, she dons the costume. And towards, like, I want to say, well, toward the end of the book, or along the book, I would say, Pantera becomes more of not just like the mask, not wearing the mask, but it almost becomes a title, right? And so in book 2, of course, we see Pantera doing her thing. She still fight, but then also book 1, we kind of see her superpowers, and she alludes to the fact that she can't do certain stuff. Mm-hmm. And so, again, with the key word being more here, in book 2, we will see her doing other stuff that we didn't see her doing in book 1. And she is so much more sure of herself in book 2. She doesn't second guess herself anymore. She knows what she can do. She's not afraid of it anymore, because in book 1, she is very afraid of her powers. She can't even, when we see her first shapeshift into a panther, she's really afraid because she's never done that before. And so in book 2, we just see her enjoy herself more, her superpowers. And I think that, you know, it's going to be fun there. But definitely we're going to see more of her in terms of her superpowers, and some other magical stuff happens that I can't really say. But I wish I could talk about this some more because I really like it. I'll just leave things there.
Yes. And you know what? I should listen. You did say more. So, of course, I would get more of when Leonora transforms to Panthera, because I feel that's what I left book 1, which I absolutely loved book 1. I left wanting more of. So it kind of makes sense. Book 1, she's coming of age. She's figuring herself out. Book 2, she's more sure of herself, and, you know, she's more doing her thing.
She's leading now. She has a new title. You know, with the way things ended in book 1, she has a sort of reputation now, and she is more feared now. And yeah, absolutely more from her. And then, of course, in book 1, there's all of these questions at the end of the book, like, again, without giving anything away, certain characters are not who they say they are. So that will be absolutely explored in book 2 as well.
Yes, because again, like I was saying earlier, you know, not that she needed more drama with, you know, Felipe, but needless to say, both men are not who they say they are. So both Andres and Felipe. So you guys, this one, it's good. It's good. I'm telling you, it's good. I hope you'll give book 1 a go, because then at the end, you're going to be like me, having all these questions and like, okay, we're going to get this or we're going to get that. The key word is more. I should have listened. Yeah. It's more. Okay, awesome, amazing. But I want to jump into your reading life really quick too, because even though we're here to talk about your book, which I absolutely love, I want to know about your reading life. So share with us the last book or books that you finished reading that you'd now recommend.
I really enjoyed The Adventures of Amina al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, just because it has all of my favorite things. It has, you know, this swashbuckling action, lady pirates, magic, demons, even history. So again, historical fantasy. I just love that genre. Or just fantasy or historical fiction. I do read romance too. So not just fantasy. I'm very new to the Emily Henry world, and I did just finish reading what's it called? Betrayed, which I really liked. I really enjoyed that one. And right now I'm reading The Jasad Heir by Sarah Hashem, and I'm really enjoying it.
Yay! Awesome. What would you say was your favorite childhood book? And I remember you mentioning you're obsessed with Zorro from a young age, even though that was on screen. So, question number one, did you read Zorro? Well, obviously, there's so many books, but did you read Zorro? And what was your favorite childhood book?
No, I mostly consumed, the TV shows, the movie, of course. And even now, we're getting so much new Zorro content for some reason. There's this new TV show on Amazon Prime, and there's going to be another one by Wilmer Valderrama. And I don't know why it's the thing again, Zorro. And then there's also another Zorro book being released, I think, next year. But that's exciting. I love that Zorro is having his moment again. And, like a lot of different characters in the superhero genre have been inspired by Zorro, like Batman. So I really like that it's having its moment again. But back to your question about my childhood favorites. I really was obsessed with this one series called Rocket's World in elementary school. It's one of the earliest books I can remember reading that I was just so obsessed. Like I even carried them in my backpack. It's about a girl named Rocket, and she's navigating junior high. And I was also kind of navigating school and popularity and boys and friendship and such. And they're just so wonderful to read. A few months ago, I purchased the entire series. I don't know where my older books went, but I just have them and I just look at them and they make me feel so nice. Just reading things again that you read when you were a child. It just makes you feel so nice.
I couldn't agree with you more. I love revisiting those books from my childhood. It just, one, it can make you feel warm and fuzzy inside, but also it transports you back to that time. And I think that's amazing. But what books are you looking forward to reading in the year ahead?
I am very excited for Sofia Robleda's Daughter of Fire, just because, again, it's historical fantasy and it's set in 16th century Guatemala. So that just is very fascinating to me. And then I'm also looking forward to reading Exiled by Iron by Ahibor Okosan, which is the second book. I believe it's the Tainted Blood series. So I'm very excited about that one. Sophia's is July, and then Ahi's is in October, I believe. But I can't wait. I can't wait. There's just so many books coming out this year that sound incredible. There's very little time.
Yes, so many books, so little time. Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
such a cliche, but it's true.
Absolutely. So we also love indie bookstores on this podcast. So share with our listeners some of your favorite indies.
Well, I live in San Diego. So Mysterious Galaxy is local to me, and I love them so much. I will shout them out every time because, I've met some of my favorite authors, Mysterious Galaxy, over the years. And for my launch, I'm visiting them, and we're doing a book signing, and which is very special, again, because I've been there before and I've met my favorite authors there. And they do so much for the community, the book community, and even in San Diego. So they're definitely one of my favorites here. I mean, there's other ones here in San Diego as well. I will shout out Warwick's. They're all independently owned. Libellula Books, they are independently owned as well. Women owned, Latina owned, which is fantastic. And another one, I will also shout out Diesel Bookstores. They're so fantastic. I love indies. I do.
Yeah, we have to love them. They're amazing. So in addition to loving books and bookstores, as readers, we do have those reader problems. So sometimes there are listeners on the show who are struggling to find time to read, but we also have those readers who end up in those dreaded reading slumps. So share with our listeners some tips that have worked for you when, one, you're struggling to find time to read. How do you find time to read? But also when you land in a reading slump, how do you get out? What tips have worked for you?
Oh my God, the $1,000,000 question. How do I find time to read with writing books? You just have to. It's just one of those things. Well, not only do I love to read, but you just have to keep, again, from a writer's perspective, you just have to do it to, you have to keep improving your craft. And the only way to do that is just by reading. So if you want to write better, you just read. So I find, even 10, 20 minutes at the end of the day just really helps for me. But in terms of a reading slump, the answer is sort of the paradox, because I almost never reread books. There's just too many books to read. But when I am in a reading slump, I just find myself reaching for something that I've already read that I know that I will like. And then, sometimes I will either watch a TV show or a movie, and that kind of gets my mood going for a certain genre. So if I binge watch a fantasy series, then maybe I will want to read a fantasy book. But, I've been there, and it's really, it's not great. It's not fun, but at least we have options. And again, we always have that one book that we love and that we can go back to when we find ourselves in that situation. But yeah, that's what's worked for me in the past.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So kind of wrapping things up and getting back to your book, what are you hoping readers might think or feel? What reactions are you hoping for in an ideal world after they've turned the last page of Son of Blood and Ruin?
My hope, of course, is for readers to find enjoyment and escapism. I also really hope that, Mexican, Latin American, and Indigenous readers feel seen and celebrated. I think most of all, if a reader finds value in what they've learned in my book, then, that's perfect. That's wonderful. I get readers who slide into my DMs and they tell me, I've never read anything like this before. I knew nothing of Napa mythology or Mexican history. And that means a lot, because they learned something that they didn't know before. And while I'm not a historian and I don't need to teach or anything, I just really like that people are learning about Mexico. They're learning about its people, its true inhabitants, or its original inhabitants, I should say. And, I adore this world. And if readers have fun and yet also learn a couple of things along the way, then that's wonderful.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's a wonderful thing when you can learn something new. I know for a fact I did, but I also had so much fun because, again, you're going to get that historical detail where we're learning stuff. You're going to have that fantasy you can escape into, the adventure that will keep you turning the pages, the romance that might make you swoon a little, but also side-eye some people. And it's just all around fun. I can't wait for book 2. Marielle, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Really loved it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reader's Couch podcast. Please subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Until next time, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks again for listening, and happy reading.